My name's Jake Edgley. I run a small architectural practice called Edgley Design, and the project I'm going to talk about is Pear House, which was a self-build project for my own house in Dulwich in London. It was an experimental project for us as a practice. That's what's fantastic as an architect about building your own house. Gave us a chance to try things out that we hadn't done before. We didn't have a builder. I got a group of friends together. Seemed like a great idea at the start. Looking back on it, seemed slightly crazy, but it did give us that control. It gave us the ability and the opportunity to make things up as we went along and experiment. Again, that's normally the worst way to do a project, but it gave us the luxury to experiment in that way. I'd previously built quite a few timber-framed houses around London, and very environmental, very quick, very good in complex London sites that are tricky and awkward, very adaptable. But we had some problems with the lightweight thermal mass of those, and so we thought we'd try experiment with concrete on this project. We thought we would try using concrete on a project that didn't have a client. We thought it might be a good place to start with a material that requires a lot of experience and skill. It had the practical benefit of bringing a lot of thermal mass into the building, but also it's the poetic qualities we were interested in. I think we were inspired by the National Theatre, and what we wanted to do with the building was try and domesticate that. The National Theatre has got beautiful boardmark concrete. It's got lovely textures to it. It's quite raw when you get up close, surprisingly raw and rough. And we wanted to bring that scale down in the building. The site was a piece of derelict land in Dulwich in South London. Abandoned 50 years, 6 feet high and rubbish. 6 weeks into clearing it up with a JCB, we found a motorbike. Didn't find anything worse, which was good. And it was covered in trees, a lot of them growing out of piles of builders' rubbish that had to come down, but that was the context we worked with. The house was designed around the trees that we decided to keep. The best of those was a 100-year-old pear tree that was left over from the site's original use as a Victorian market garden. And at the time, 1880s, that the houses were laid out, the Victorians laid out market gardens often in that part of London. Quite amazing, really. The fruit and veg in London was being grown in amongst suburban houses for London. And it's kind of almost a shame people are building houses on those plots now, but the economics have changed. So we had this wonderful 100-year-old pear tree, the house is being built in two halves around that tree. And the boardmark concrete is a reference to that context. All the details in the building are very vertical. We've tried to minimise the horizontal lines so that we drop into that woodland context. And the basic diagram of the building is a concrete base of the ground floor with a very simple timber box on top. Again, vertical detailing and a very handmade approach to the timber detailing as well, where handmade aluminium extrusions are used to break up the mass of the building and bring detail, and those are built around windows that are just built into the structure. Using double glazed units just built straight in without buying any products in a handmade way. So the concrete itself was quite an adventure. David Bennett got involved. I'm very glad I got in touch with him. He brought his expertise, gave us the courage to give double-skinned construction ago. There used to be a lot of concrete skills in the UK in the 60s and 70s, but I think they've faded. There's a certain kind of very pristine concrete used on infrastructure projects that we're good at, but the board marked was definitely reviving a lost art. We were lucky through David to get a very experienced contractor, Torian Mangan. I think they took a team off Crossrail to come and build our house. The only people in the UK who seemed interested in trying to build this project. They built the double skin shutters in one go. So built it backwards from the outside, board marking, formwork, insulation, more steel work, and then the inside. And really, doing that kind of concrete work is joinery. The pouring the concrete is the last half a day in the process, but it's all about the skill of the joiners, and these guys were able to build the formwork in a way that meant they could take it all apart, reuse it 5 times, and any water leak anywhere, and this bearing in mind the whole shutter is made out of 100mm wide boards. Any leak between a board and you get a deep black line in the concrete, and I think there's about 2 or 3, so that's pretty amazing. We had some issues. We made our samples a metre high. We did a lot of experimentation with the timber to get the detail that we wanted, but to get that refinement so not as rough as we started off with sawn boards. It was too rough. Planed boards, there was nothing there. We found a mill with a really sharp saw eventually in Kent, so it was nice. It was a local material from outside London and a local supplier, so that's nice. And we turned the shutters back into the project. We made a lot of external high fences, timber-clad walls essentially outside the building that are part of the composition. So internally you have the board marked concrete running along the external walls, and then that becomes then that extends out to the landscape using the shutters just turned round, and that was nice to have that reuse. In a strategic level, we had to, because we were only doing the concrete, the ground floor, we had to design all of these walls to be self-supporting. So out of that, we developed a diagram where a series of buttresses formed a thick 600mm void that became our kind of service void. So the wall ended up about 900 thick, and that's expressed outside. And then joinery runs at low level inside the building in these service voids. So there's no services in the concrete. We weren't trying to feed cables and conduits through it. Well, we make that a bit easier. The concrete's entirely thermally broken, sits on structural insulation. We used basalt fibre ties, so there's no thermal connectivity between the two surfaces. And we felt we were breaking new ground a bit there with our engineer, so that was exciting. And then in the centre of the building we have double height stair cords that provide lateral restraint to the building. And there, inside the building where you're going to touch it, we went through an MDO faced concrete, an MDO board that gives you a lovely matte finish, much more like your kind of classic modern Foster concrete. But it was nice to experiment with those. It was interesting that you'd think that would be more difficult to achieve, but actually it's what contractors are used to, and it's quite easy to repair as well. Whereas the board marked was almost impossible. It's a textured surface, and after a lot of experimenting, we just left it. All the concrete in the building is exactly how it came out the day we struck the moulds, well, apart from the obviously natural changes in colour, and that was a nice way to work with it as well. So the building we built around it was quite sharp and quite crisp, with some wall materials, oak face ply and brass, to bring some colour into it against the various greys of the concrete. But that the imperfections become the kind of poetry of that material and really bring some character to it. And as a separate part of the building, we did some polished concrete floors, again just experimenting with the textures and that, how the different materials work together. But it was quite an adventure, and I'm not sure I will be a contractor again for a little while. I have learned something about what contractors do. I think that you can, as a self-builder, if you're contracting, it gives you the time to, as I said earlier, like make things up as you go along and experiment and have incredible control over things. What that generally ends up meaning is you take the process one step at a time, and it takes a very long time. And I think that's what a contractor would have finished the building. We were building for 2.5 years, and we still haven't finished. We're getting there. But that's again what the project was about. It is it's been about the craft of concrete.